The chamber stretched across horizons of architecture too vast for any single gaze to take in, a dome of obsidian latticework studded with crystalline lights that shimmered like a captured starfield. Every delegate present represented civilizations older than recorded human history, their voices steeped in the weight of empires that had risen and solidified across millennia. The air itself hummed with gravitas, layered with scents from alien atmospheres carefully filtered so that hundreds of species could breathe side by side. It was a theater of power designed to remind newcomers of their smallness, and today all of that grand machinery had turned toward a single subject: Earth. Whispers rippled through rows of scaled, feathered, and chitinous diplomats as the name was uttered. To them, Earth was not a planet of significance but an anomaly, a primitive world dragged too early into the web of galactic politics. Their judgments were already written in the tilt of mandibles and the amused flashes of bioluminescent skin. Humanity, after all, had been space-faring for scarcely a century. To species who measure time in epochs, this was less than infancy. The council speaker, an imposing being of flowing metallic limbs whose voice resonated in harmonic chords, called for silence. The agenda was clear: determine the future of humanity within the galactic order. It was not framed as a negotiation but as an evaluation. To most of the delegates, the matter seemed trivial. They remembered the reports: wars fought on the surface of a single planet with weapons that scorched continents, fleets cobbled together from converted exploration vessels, a civilization barely crawling past its own solar cradle. What danger could such a species pose? The first delegate to speak was draped in silver-scaled armor that glittered under the chamber lights. Their words dripped condescension as they reminded the assembly of humanity's bloody record, citing genocides, endless wars, and ecological ruin. They consume their world and call it progress. The delegate intoned, each syllable a polished dagger. Grant them parity with us, and we risk contagion of their chaos. They should be bound, not welcomed. Agreement swept across much of the chamber. Others piled on, their rhetoric sharpened by centuries of practice in suppressing younger species. Restrictions were proposed: demilitarization treaties, prohibitions on ship production, and even guardianship by more mature civilizations. The consensus seemed inevitable. A few dissenting voices tried to slow the momentum, pointing out that Earth had accomplished in mere generations what had taken others millennia. They argued that such velocity of progress hinted at a deeper potential. Yet those cautions were drowned beneath laughter and dismissive waves of clawed or tentacled hands. Behind the spectacle of debate lay a deeper truth: the Council feared disruption. Each empire seated there had carved its niche through balance and tradition, waging carefully limited wars, drawing rigid lines of territory, and ensuring no newcomer upset the established order. Humanity, with its unpredictable nature, threatened to fracture those patterns. But rather than admit that fear, the delegates cloaked their anxiety in arrogance. The discussion shifted toward enforcement. If Earth resisted, what punishment would be suitable? Some suggested embargoes, others, open military intervention. The chamber buzzed with casual certainty, as though humanity's fate had already been sealed. They spoke of Earth as if it were a resource deposit or a minor border dispute, not a species with agency. Yet woven into the chamber's noise were small threads of unease. A few of the older civilizations, the ones whose histories were riddled with near-extinction wars, remained strangely quiet. Their representatives did not sneer. Instead, their eyes, or equivalent sensory organs, lingered with a stillness that hinted at memory. They had learned long ago that underestimated species sometimes carried teeth sharp enough to scar galaxies. Still, momentum carried the day. The speaker finally raised its resonant chords to deliver the verdict: Earth would be compelled to present its military strength for inspection before the Council. It was framed as a formality, a confirmation of weakness to justify the restrictions already outlined. The decision drew nods and hisses of satisfaction. Delegates leaned back, convinced the matter was settled. The mood was almost celebratory. Some already imagined the political capital they would earn by sponsoring Earth's protection. Others whispered of carving out human trade routes for their own gain once the species was neutered. In their minds, humanity had already been stripped of dignity, forced to bow in a chamber built to crush the will of young civilizations. No one noticed how quickly the decree had been drafted, or how little true debate had taken place. It was the arrogance of institutions that had endured too long without challenge. The council's chambers had echoed with such decisions countless times before, and always the young species bent or broke beneath them. Why should this time be any different? And so, with a sweep of metallic limbs and the shimmering of crystalline lights above, the demand was formally issued. Earth was to reveal the scope of its defenses, to stand naked before the eyes of empires that had already judged it. To the delegates, the outcome seemed preordained, a humiliation, followed by compliance. What they did not yet understand was that in binding Earth to a display of its strength, they had not secured weakness. They had invited revelation. The moment the decree reached Earth, there was no sign of outrage or panic. Where other young civilizations might have protested or pleaded, humanity responded with a composed acknowledgement. The Council expected resistance, perhaps even desperation, but what came instead was acceptance delivered in clipped, deliberate words. Earth would comply. The decision alone unsettled several delegates, though none admitted it aloud. They had anticipated flustered denials, not quiet agreement. When the human delegation arrived, they carried no entourage of exotic beasts or ostentatious banners like their peers. Instead, they walked in simple formation, clad in dark uniforms without embellishment, faces calm and unreadable. The contrast struck immediately. In a chamber where most species asserted dominance through spectacle, the absence of such display became its own kind of statement. These humans did not look like petitioners. They looked like professionals who had already weighed the outcome and found it manageable. Their leaders spoke with measured clarity, never raising their voice, never straining to compete with the chamber's natural reverberations. The opening words disarmed the expectation of defensiveness. The humans did not deny their history of wars. They recited it plainly, acknowledging their centuries of bloodshed, their struggles across continents, and the near self-destruction of their world. Every alien who had come prepared to throw those accusations was left with nothing to weaponize, because the humans claimed the scars as their own evidence. What others saw as shame, they framed as experience. Conflict, they explained, had tempered them, forged methods of survival unmatched by any species sheltered within orderly galactic politics. The reaction was swift and predictable. Delegates scoffed, mandibles clicking in amusement, voices laced with derision. They labeled humanity reckless, a species defined by barbarism rather than wisdom. Some laughed outright, convinced the humans were dressing savagery as resilience. Yet the mockery failed to provoke anger. The delegation absorbed it with unbroken calm, the way stone absorbs rain. Their refusal to react became its own silent rebuke. Then came the statement that silenced much of the chamber. Earth would not resist the demand for demonstration. They would present their defensive capacity as instructed, without protest. The phrasing was crucial. They did not call it a burden, nor did they imply that what they were showing would be the totality of their strength. They used only one phrase: standard defensive capacity, a choice of words that carried an ambiguity which few noticed in the moment. Those who did shift uneasily in their seats, unsettled by the precision. The majority, however, erupted in smug satisfaction. This was exactly the outcome they had envisioned. Humanity would expose the crude patchwork of its fleets, the blunt force of its crude armaments, and then bow to the restrictions imposed. The chamber buzzed with overconfidence, as if the trial were already concluded. Yet as the laughter grew, the humans stood motionless, letting the sound roll over them without expression. Only a handful of civilizations refrained from joining the chorus. These were the elder powers who had clawed their way through brutal survival, who understood the weight behind composure under humiliation. They recognized that the humans were not cowed but deliberate. For them, the silence of Earth's delegation carried more menace than 1,000 shouted threats. As the formal exchange concluded, the humans spoke again, this time describing the framework of their defense doctrine. They did not list weapons or fleets but philosophies, decentralized command structures, adaptability under catastrophic losses, and the principle that survival was the only acceptable measure of victory. To the majority of the chamber, these were meaningless abstractions. They preferred to measure strength in sheer tonnage of warships or the brilliance of energy shields. The humans spoke of war as a storm that consumed everything, a force requiring flexibility and sacrifice. Their language carried undertones alien to species accustomed to ceremonial skirmishes and calculated border disputes. To those who paid attention, the words were unsettling. To the rest, they seemed like the delusions of a species still romanticizing its bloody past. That misinterpretation suited the humans perfectly, for they offered no correction. They allowed the council to laugh again, allowed arrogance to swell, and only held their silence until the chamber quieted under its own weight. The exchange closed without spectacle. The humans neither threatened nor begged. They left behind only an unshakable impression. They were confident enough not to defend themselves with words. The council believed it had secured obedience, but what it had truly witnessed was something far more dangerous, restraint born not of weakness, but of certainty. And while most of the chamber returned to their routines convinced of victory, a few could not shake the lingering chill that clung to the humans' parting words. They had promised to show their defenses, and nothing in their tones suggested inadequacy. It suggested only inevitability. The day of the demonstration arrived with an air of dismissive curiosity among the gathered civilizations. They anticipated a display of crude machinery and awkward maneuvers, something that would confirm every insult they had hurled in earlier debates. When the first images of Earth's fleet appeared, their smugness only deepened. What they saw were ships whose designs seemed outdated even by their own ancient archives, angular hulls of steel alloys, bulky frames that bore no resemblance to the sleek, crystalline vessels of the established powers. To many it looked like a child's attempt to mimic adult craft, clumsy and uninspired. The murmurs of laughter had barely begun to fade when the demonstration commenced. Those old hulls, relics of a bygone age, moved with precision that was impossible to dismiss. Coordinated formations shifted and reformed in patterns that defied expectation. Every vessel seemed to anticipate the other's actions with uncanny accuracy, executing maneuvers that in simulations left opposing fleets broken apart and isolated. These were not blunt instruments staggering into battle. They were disciplined instruments of choreography, every shift calculated to maximize pressure on an enemy while minimizing exposure. The chamber's laughter faltered as calculations began scrolling across alien displays, revealing efficiency rates that surpassed anything recorded among the Council's member militaries. What unsettled them most was not the technology but the doctrine underlying it. Humanity had taken ships considered primitive and turned them into predators through training, adaptability, and ruthless efficiency. The aliens realized, to their discomfort, that humans had mastered the art of doing more with less. Where others relied on overwhelming power, Earth relied on unpredictability and relentless adaptation. These qualities made their fleets not weaker but far more dangerous. The next stage escalated further. Outdated warships were replaced by modular vessels bristling with systems designed for versatility. Instead of specializing in one form of combat, these ships shifted roles in the middle of engagements, assault cruisers transforming into carriers, support vessels converting into artillery platforms. To the Council, this was an alien concept. Their fleets were rigid, each ship class locked into a singular role. Humanity had abandoned such rigidity, building machines that could reshape battlefields at will. The weapons displayed provoked an even sharper reaction. Instead of the elegant energy lances and particle beams favored across the galaxy, humans unleashed projectiles, slugs of metal accelerated to near-relativistic speeds. At first, many scoffed at the apparent crudeness of kinetic weaponry. That disdain evaporated when simulations showed those projectiles ripping through standard shields as though they were paper, bypassing defenses optimized against energy discharges. For the first time in centuries, the Council saw weapons that rendered their doctrines obsolete. The humans were careful to explain not with boastful tones, but with clinical precision. They described the vulnerabilities they had identified in common galactic defenses, detailing how kinetic energy concentrated on a single point could overwhelm diffusion-based shielding. They demonstrated swarming drones operating with collective intelligence, overwhelming larger ships by sheer adaptability rather than brute force. Every revelation chipped away at the comfortable assumptions the Council had built their military traditions upon. Silence began to spread. Delegates who had prepared witty remarks now found their throats dry. The implications were sinking in. Humanity had not only studied galactic technology but had dissected it, found its flaws, and engineered solutions that no one else had considered necessary. The Council had spent millennia perfecting incremental improvements within a stagnant framework, while humanity had come from outside that framework entirely, thinking like survivors rather than aristocrats of war. The most chilling moment came when the humans outlined their philosophy. War, they explained, was never limited. To them, conflict was not a contest over prestige or border disputes but an existential struggle. Their training, their doctrines, and their weapons were designed around the assumption that any war could escalate into total destruction. They prepared not for symbolic victories but for survival at any cost. The chamber, filled with civilizations accustomed to controlled engagements and negotiated limits, could not fathom this perspective. To the humans, restraint in war was not an option, it was extinction. As the demonstration concluded, the atmosphere shifted from derision to unease. What began as an expectation of humiliation had turned into a revelation of capability none had anticipated. Some demanded the presentation be halted, claiming it was destabilizing. Others sat frozen, unable to reconcile the image of a young species with the reality of doctrines centuries ahead of their own. The Council had asked Earth to bear its strength, certain they would expose weakness. Instead, they had been shown the sharp edge of ingenuity forged through desperation and history's crucible. The demonstration ended without flourish, the humans stepping back into silence as the chamber absorbed the weight of what they had just seen. It was not arrogance that lingered, but a quiet certainty that the balance of power had shifted, and no one could return to the comfort of their old assumptions. Humanity had revealed only a fraction, and already the galaxy trembled. What had already unsettled the chamber now gave way to something far more devastating. When the humans announced that what had been displayed so far represented nothing more than inherited frameworks and legacy systems, the shift in atmosphere was immediate. The delegates leaned forward, some scoffing in disbelief, others suddenly tense, sensing that the true weight of Earth's power had not yet even been touched. The next phase unfolded with an intensity that erased the last traces of arrogance. Holographic projections expanded across the chamber, filling the vast dome with images of war machines that dwarfed anything previously shown. Towering vessels stretched kilometers in length, their frames layered with overlapping armor designed not for elegance but for endurance. These were not ceremonial flagships but instruments of sustained warfare. Their very design radiated a brutal purpose: to absorb punishment, to survive under conditions that would annihilate entire fleets, and to continue fighting when logic said retreat was the only option. Descriptions followed with clinical detachment. Earth possessed stealth fleets equipped with systems capable of masking not only physical presence but electronic signatures, ships able to pass undetected into the heart of enemy formations before unleashing devastation. Orbital defense networks, redundant and distributed, were shown in simulation destroying fleets many times their size through layered traps and autonomous strike platforms. Even more disturbing were the depictions of relativistic projectiles, weapons that turned simple mass into unstoppable force by accelerating it to fractions of light speed. No shield yet known could withstand the impact. A single strike could erase a capital ship, or worse, strip life from a planet. The chamber, once noisy with derision, now sat in weighted silence. Delegates whispered among themselves, calculating how their fleets would fare against such doctrines, and most found the answers unbearable. Entire strategies they had relied upon for centuries collapsed under the implications. Their defensive grids were designed to resist energy weapons, not unstoppable kinetic storms. Their command structures assumed predictable battle rhythms, not an opponent who thrived on chaos. The Council realized, with dawning horror, that Earth's weapons were designed not to compete within the accepted rules of conflict but to annihilate them altogether. What broke the last remnants of complacency was not the weaponry itself but the philosophy that underpinned it. The humans explained their guiding principle: survival beyond compromise. For civilizations used to limited conflicts and political stalemates, war was an exercise in control. For humanity, it was the edge of extinction. Every doctrine, every weapon, every stratagem was rooted in the assumption that if they lost once, there would be no tomorrow. Where the galaxy fought wars for resources or prestige, Earth fought every war as if it were final. Hollow simulations reinforced the point. Scenarios unfolded where human fleets dismantled coalitions of empires, not through brute numbers but through relentless adaptability. They showed asymmetric campaigns where smaller forces bled larger ones until collapse was inevitable. They displayed cyber warfare protocols that could infiltrate and corrupt alien command structures, seizing control of fleets mid-battle. Every demonstration shattered the illusion of superiority the Council had worn so proudly. Delegates who once laughed now sat rigid, their eyes fixed on projections they wished they could dismiss but could not. Some pressed for the display to end, their voices quivering with a mixture of anger and fear. Others leaned closer, compelled despite themselves, because what they were witnessing was not merely strength, it was mastery born of desperation and unrelenting will. The humans presented it all without boasting, their tone steady, almost cold. They were not seeking approval, nor were they making threats. They were simply stating facts, and those facts left no room for doubt. Earth had studied war not as a tool of influence but as a condition of existence, and in doing so had reached heights of preparation no other species dared pursue. When the final simulation faded, the silence that followed was suffocating. The chamber's vastness seemed suddenly small, its grandeur diminished beneath the weight of what had been revealed. For the first time in living memory, the Council had no words, no jeers, no casual decrees. They had asked Earth to reveal its strength, and now they understood the magnitude of their mistake. No applause came, no challenges followed. The quiet stretched, filled only with the echo of what humanity had shown, not just power, but inevitability. It was no longer a question of whether Earth belonged in the galactic order. The question was how the galaxy would adapt to Earth's presence, because it was clear that it would never be the same again. The echoes of the final projection still lingered when the weight of silence pressed against every delegate. No one dared to resume the old games of posturing. The laughter, the sneers, the smugness, all had been burned away, leaving only unease. Eyes that once looked at Earth as a curiosity now regarded humanity with the same wary reverence reserved for forces of nature. The chamber felt different, as though a storm had passed through and left the air stripped of arrogance. It was the oldest powers who broke the silence first, their voices quieter than usual. They urged caution, warning that humanity's capabilities, if unrestrained, could disrupt balances that had endured for thousands of years. Some demanded immediate containment, desperate to cage what they had just witnessed. Yet even as they spoke, their tones betrayed uncertainty, because none could name a strategy that offered true security. How do you contain a species that had already prepared for extinction-level scenarios? Other delegates shifted quickly to opportunism. They proposed alliances, treaties, shared research, anything that might tether Earth to their interests. What had moments ago been derided as a primitive world was suddenly recast as a potential partner too valuable to alienate. Rival empires whispered urgently to one another, realizing that humanity's strength might tip the scales in their ancient competitions. Fear mingled with the scent of ambition, the chamber's factions scrambling to reshape their agendas before the new reality set like stone. Through it all, the humans stood steady, their composure unchanged from the moment they entered. When they spoke again, it was without triumph or menace, their voices level and controlled. They stated that Earth did not seek conquest or dominance. Their purpose, they explained, was peace secured by deterrence. They had revealed what they possessed not to provoke but to prevent. To civilizations who had just glimpsed annihilation, the restraint in those words struck harder than threats ever could. Humanity was declaring that it held the capacity to devastate yet chose not to wield it. That choice, deliberate and calm, carried a gravity that silenced further interruptions. The chamber stirred with disbelief. For species accustomed to power being flaunted and exploited, the refusal to claim hegemony was unnerving. The thought that Earth might genuinely prefer coexistence unsettled them more than conquest would have, because it suggested confidence so absolute it required no display of dominance. Some suspected manipulation, others sincerity, but none could ignore the aura of inevitability that clung to those measured statements. Debate erupted in hushed urgency. If humanity's words were genuine, they might represent a stabilizing force against other rising threats. If deceitful, then every empire present risked extinction should they miscalculate. The Council had always operated in a world of half measures and recoverable losses, but the humans had forced them to confront the possibility of wars where no second chances existed. The recognition settled across the chamber like cold iron. The galaxy was no longer safe for complacency. When the human delegation delivered their final words, they did so with the same steadiness they had carried throughout. "We have shown you only enough to make you understand," they said. "Earth does not wish for war. But if war comes, we do not lose." The phrasing was deliberate, stripped of bravado yet edged with certainty that no one could dismiss as exaggeration. It was not a threat, but a truth stated plainly, and that truth resonated with a finality that drained the will to argue. As they finished, no counter came. The Council speaker, usually a figure of commanding resonance, gave no verdict, no sweeping declaration. The chamber's grandeur, designed to project unshakable authority, felt suddenly inadequate. Delegates sat in silence, each calculating what adjustments their civilizations would need to survive in this new era. Every empire present recognized that from this day forward, their strategies must revolve around one immutable fact: humanity had arrived, and humanity endured. When the humans departed, their footsteps unhurried, the chamber remained hushed. The old order had not collapsed in fire, but in revelation. No fleet had been launched, no battle fought, yet the galaxy's balance had shifted irrevocably. Where once Earth had been dismissed as a primitive child among elders, now it stood as a peer that none could afford to provoke. Respect had not been granted, it had been demanded by the undeniable weight of reality. The silence stretched long after the delegation left, as though every species present was waiting for someone else to speak first. None did. For the first time in generations, the Council had no answer, no decree that could restore its illusion of control. Humanity had not conquered them, but something far more enduring had taken root: the knowledge that in the crucible of survival, Earth had forged itself into a force the galaxy could neither ignore nor contain. And that knowledge would shape every decision from that day onward.